Good afternoon, Mr. Ryan. How are you doing today, sir?
Good, mate. What's going on, Mike? It is Friday. We haven't done a Facebook Friday in a while.
Yep.
Sometimes you got to take a breather and you got to get back in the groove. So it's nice to be back live with you on a quick call here.
Yeah, especially after all the chaos that has been the beginning of this year. For sure.
Yeah, right. We had an interesting start to the year this year, and we're not short of excitement in the world these days. So
it's a good way to put it. Excitement for sure. But
nice way to put it, right?
Yeah, with the things that we can control or pretend like we control, the real estate market is doing better than I expected. I mean, I don't know, coming into the year, beginning of the year, January, they were talking about, the interest rates are going to go up. And I think they said 4% over 12 to 18 months. And that was mid-January. And then how quick, we hit 4% in 4 weeks.
Yeah, it was interesting. So in January, we had a lot of people, a lot of economists, and these are a group of people that would either be from Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac or Zillow or the National Association of Realtors or Mortgage Bankers Association. All of them had kind of a range, and that range was pretty close. So they said, hey, our forecast for 2022 is that we're going to see interest rates in, some of them were saying, 3.75. Now at the time, we were floating around that really low 3% margin on a 30-year fixed. And a couple of them had touched 4 with their projections. And a lot of people were like, it's not hitting 4. There's no way. It's going to be around this 3.75. It's going to take some time to get there.
Yeah.
And then really after January 1st, I remember we were on a trip. As soon as the markets open, we see rates get worse. I'm like, what a way to start the rates get worse again. They get worse again. So it's like each single day as we were bringing in new loans, we're trying to navigate, how do we price these? How do we lock them? When do we suggest? Because a lot of times when you have that negative price come in, it's temporary, it bounces. This wasn't bouncing. This was like going, if you drop the ball downstairs, it hit a couple of rows down, it didn't bounce back up. It actually just kept falling down and down and down. So, so in that staircase analogy, that's like the mortgage-backed security. A lower price on that means the interest rate is more expensive. So when we kind of look at it on a scale, going down is actually the opposite for what we feel for a rate. It goes the other way. There's not as much yield in those loans anymore. So purely from a rate standpoint, we got to the market predictions incredibly quick, with, to your point, within a couple of weeks. We're actively there. In fact, this whole thing that's happening sort of overseas was predicted to maybe have a little bit of a positive spin on rates, because typically bad news causes rates to get a little bit better. And the reason we didn't really see that initially is because at the same exact time that stuff is going on, we have our Feds meeting, and they're basically saying, hey, we realize it's running a little hot. We need to control it. The only way to control it, one of our tools, is we need to raise the Fed funds rate. And so the meeting that is happening here in the next few days in March is to raise the Fed funds rate. And they were talking about maybe doing like a bigger hit all at once. Maybe they're going to do a half a point. Maybe they're going to do a full point raise on that, which is not typical. Usually they do about a quarter. They were going to go a little heavy-handed. And the reason why is because they need to curb that inflation. So when the Feds raise rates, it actually is a good thing for mortgage rates because it curbs inflation. Inflation is really the arch enemy for mortgages, for rates. So because remember that the bond is tied to a very long-term yield. If inflation is outpacing that, the return is actually negative to the lender. And so when we look at that and they go, like this past week, rates are improving a little bit, everybody gets excited, the news starts to report it. The Feds come out and go, yeah, we realize some stuff overseas isn't quite that pleasant. We're not going to mess the waters up too much. We're not going to go with a half this time. We're just going to go with a quarter. Guess what happens to rates? Rates got worse because they're like, hey, the Feds aren't serious about fixing inflation. This kills our yield. Rates are higher. And so we're seeing this in this volley back and forth. And at the same exact time, there's a tapering that's going on. Basically, in the past, during this whole COVID thing, we've had the Feds kicking in a tremendous amount of dollars. You're talking billions, to the tune of 100 billion in a month, back into driving these prices to a place where it makes interest rates better, they're backing off that support. And so as they back off that support and they get a little dovish with the Fed funds rate, not being heavy-handed with it like we want them to, causes interest rates to go up. We really think that they'll probably be kind of in the space maybe for another month or so until we see the Fed's actual rhythm. We kind of need to know their game plan. Right now, they're kind of talking a little bit in one ear and a little in another. Hey, we're going to be heavy-handed, but no, in reality, we're really not. That confusion is causing the market to basically price in the risk. We're not seeing those results that they really want to see.
Yeah, for sure. When I was in Orlando, Gary was interviewing an economist, and they were talking, and he said something that was surprising. He said that the government, when they make these adjustments to try to offset inflation right now, the government is usually pretty good at what they do. Like, their intentions are always really good. But what we've seen them do in the past is like they just jerk too far. The pendulum swings too far in one direction, right? And it's successful in doing what they want to do, but then they got to pull it back a little bit, right? So like think back to the end of 2018 when rates went up and we were at like almost 5. We were like 4.87 or something, right? And then the beginning of 19, so they went real high, and then they started letting it go at the beginning of 19, and we finally started recovering, and then COVID and everything went wild after that. But, same thing with, the stimulus money, and like they had the right solution to the problem, but maybe they went a little overkill. So with all of that fresh in mind, I'm interested to watch this unfold and see how accurate that statement is moving forward instead of just hindsight, right?
Yeah, the reaction a lot of times, to your point, it's a little bit sometimes too much,
Mm-hmm.
and sometimes it's too much a little bit too late.
Mm-hmm.
And so that timing is really, really critical. Now they're trying to get better at that, but if they don't, what happens is the inflation that we had, that we're feeling now, we all are feeling that, right? With everything that we had. So the reason that exists is, remember, we go back probably 5 or 6 months ago, it was transitory. It's like, hey, don't worry about it, it's transitory. Transitory meaning like it's temporary.
Mm-hmm.
Now they're like, all right, it's a little more persistent. This is probably going to hang around a little while. It's kind of like the friend that comes to your house and crashes all the time. Like, oh no, it's transitory. He's not going to hang out every weekend. And then it's like, no, it's persistent. This dude's hanging out all the time. Like, we got to get him out of here, like figure something out. So that's kind of what's happening. They're realizing it's definitely a problem. They got to take action. And unfortunately, that's a little bit too late. And they're doing it, in my opinion, in a somewhat risky place, which is, let's taper and raise rates at the same time. You might want to consider one or the other, but both at the same time is really disruptive. It's like I love the coffee analogy. It's like, hey, give a worker to get a job done. They're going to go build a wall. They need some energy. Let's give them 12 cups of coffee, a bunch of stimulus to go build that wall and be productive. And then you say, you wake up one morning, they go to work, and they see their foreman, and the guy goes, bad news. Today you get 2 cups of coffee. And by the way, instead of 8 hours, we're working 16. You're not going to be as productive. Now you're asking more for that same worker with less stimulus. It's going to have a catastrophic effect.
Yeah. So
that's what the Feds do, is they adjust. And then if they see this worker slowly not producing, they come over and they go, here's another cup of coffee for you. Hey, we're going to cut your hours by 2 hours today. Right? They try to find that balance to where the worker's productive. Well, the worker in this case is the monetary system. It's what affects all of us.
Yeah.
In the economy.
For sure. And so with all of that talk now, we've talked about rates going up and things being kind of volatile. With all of that, the market here is still doing better than I expected. Like I started off saying, like it's just, February had second highest selling price ever. It was at $475 and change. January was like $450, and December was like $476. I mean, that was a huge drop. And when we hit $476, that was a massive increase. I think before that, the highest we had been was like $465. So it was a $10,000 spike. But with February having high rates like that, or high closing price, the interest rates were already going up, right? The number of units that closed was right on track with last year, February. Our days on market are going up, which is interesting. Our list price to sales price ratio is right around 100%. And, versus last year when we were at like 103.5, 104, everything was just going way up, right? So we're coming back down to a normal list to sales price ratio, and our days on market are back to a healthier number. Like 30 is still very fast in the grand scheme of everything, right? It's not the 7 days or 14 days that we got to last year. So it's leveling out on those, but our prices are still staying high. And like, we're not feeling the pinch there like I expected we would with the interest rates. Like usually those kind of go more hand in hand, and it's just these other stats kind of are changing while the ones I expected were not. And for the days on market to be going up, but our inventory is still very low. Like usually those two things track together. You know what I mean? It's
right.
It's super interesting to watch and see, but the market is doing amazing.
Yeah, you have an interesting thing here. We have probably, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I would assume it's about one home per every 1,000 people in our market, our market, your market, my market, right?
Yeah,
Somewhere
that's
close
about
to
right.
that. Yeah, so about one home for every 1,000. So let's be real. I mean, interest rates moving up a bit and prices moving up at the same time and touching some of these record highs is going to make things feel unaffordable for some. For others, they've also received wage earning increases over time. And so that movement up doesn't actually impact them as much as it does another family.
Yeah.
And so we don't want to be insensitive to somebody that may actually, in reality, be priced out of the market or in a bad spot where they have to choose, they want to either buy or rent. And they're looking at rent prices going up double digits from last year. And gosh, remember last year, we already thought rents were high. Double-digit increases this year. Housing prices, yeah, they're still pacing really well. The rents are actually at a faster pace for an increase than we're seeing with house prices. So I think if you look at the comparison, we're always doing a compare, buy or rent. If you're the homeowner, like which one makes more sense? Mm-hmm. There's still a really, really heavy reason to consider the ownership portion versus the rent portion. In most cases, just looking at numbers. But again, you have situations that come into play. Maybe somebody's not going to be in this area for a long time. They're here on work for a year or 2 years.
Yeah,
you're going to pay a heavy price in rent. Maybe negotiate that with your employer, but see if they can offset that somehow and kind of ride it out. But if you're here, if you're rooted, you got kids in school, or you think that you're going to be here for a while, I mean, really, even at that pace, the housing price is actually still relatively affordable. When we talk about rates going up, they're not 6, 7, 8, 9%. I mean, there was a time in history where they were in that range. They were even higher than that. They were double digit.
2006, we came down to 6.5.
Right. Exactly. So, my point with that is that we kind of get a little spoiled with these rates that are in the twos, very commonly in the twos, sometimes touching ones. Low threes. Like, these are phenomenal opportunities. And back when we were talking about, we're like, grab those, because this is a really good opportunity. You're fixing that debt for 30 years at a rate that's going to pace below inflation. When we used to say you're borrowing free money, this is exactly what we're talking about.
Yep.
If that money, if we're comparing it against inflation, it's technically free. Even at 4, 4.25, 4.5, it's still free money compared to what we're experiencing in inflation now and historic inflation as well.
Well, inflation right now is at like 7.5% or something, right? That like, so, right. Okay, but, right, Ryan, let me borrow $1,000 and I'll pay you 4%.
Yeah.
Right. And then I'll go invest that money and I'll get 7. I'll give you your 4 and I get 3% for free.
Pretty much. Yeah.
Not even my money.
That 7% isn't exactly what you and I are feeling on a lot of things. It strips out food and energy costs, right? Which we also realize, like, our grocery bills are a bit more now. Yeah. Our energy costs are a bit more now. that 7.6 reported is a measure that kind of favors a lower inflation or inflation value. An easy one, would be that everybody, I think right now, except for the EV drivers, will be gas. And if we simply said, a decade ago, I borrow $100 from you, Mike, to go and fill up my vehicle with gas, and I calculate down how many gallons of gas I got. And then today you run into me, you're like, hey, don't you owe me $100? I'm like, oh, that's right. I give you the $100 back, and you were to go out and buy gas, and we compare the ticket.
Half.
I got way more gas than you got today, right? And that's the inflation kind of stacked. It's not just the 7.6.
Yeah.
It's what happened last year. It's what happened the year before. What happened the year before that. So we're looking at it in a long time frame. That's what's the big differential.
Yeah, the compounding problem is, anyway, we talked about that last time too, with borrowing the $20 and going with it. Yeah, it's crazy. And back to your point with interest rates, they are not high. They are higher than they have been. They are certainly not high. I mean, I remember celebrating, God, what was that, like 2008 or 9 when interest rates came down to 4%? Like, it was unheard of. I think that was like the end of 8, because that's right when the first time tax credit was coming out and stuff like that. It was just nuts. So they're just higher than they have been, but also lower than they were even 4 years ago. Like, we've talked about 5 and 6 and 8, right? 18, they were almost 5% again. So it's recent history, we're still there. Like, we're still low.
Yeah, I think if you look back in history, it's kind of interesting. You talked about like 5 and 6, right? 2005, 2006 were areas where generally the house prices were a bit inflated. They had some really risky loans that kind of were the common practice, which we know how that unfolded.
Yeah.
But the interest rates, to your point, on the fixed product were somewhere in the low to mid 6s at that time. And so let's say that you bought a home in 2006 and you got a 6.5% interest rate, and you made your payments and credit's still good. Well, we know now that we can do a look back, you probably would have refinanced 2, maybe 3 different times to bring that rate of cost, or that cost of borrowing that money, down. And so yes, your price on that house at that time during a few years would have felt a bit heavy because the market had a massive correction. But your cost for ownership would have come down over time. And that's one of the things that I think is a big miss. Like, we have a really easy time as just people seeing kind of the next month, the next 3 months, the next 6 months, maybe the next year. After that, it gets a little cloudy. We have a really hard time kind of future casting 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. Yeah. And when we look at these things, we're looking at housing, and we're fixing a rate of cost for our housing for a long period of time, assuming it's going to fit your family's need for a while. We look at that and we realize that in an ownership position, aside from the tax benefits, aside from potential appreciation and paying a debt down and kind of forced savings that goes along with it, you also have a borrowing cost that's fixed. And if all things go south, it's going to be cheaper than what it would be in the future. Or if they improve and the rates get better than what they are today, you get that downside. You get to lower that down, that cost over time. You don't really get that with rent. I can't remember a period of time where somebody was being charged $2,400 a month for rent, and their landlord called them up and said, we're going to drop it to $1,600 because we really like you. And then we're going to take it down a couple of years later to $1,200. It just doesn't happen. No. So rent is almost like that baseline that sort of sticks and stays. It only really adjusts when a tenant moves out and they have to kind of reset the market.
Yep. So again, all of that was leading up to fixing your housing expenses, right? And going into the future and watching all of that unfold at rates that aren't the lowest they have ever been. They're still low. Like, it's still very affordable, and you can just watch it go up. And then back to your point on, if they are high right now and they do go back down, you can refinance and get that lowered. And you made a comment that, 2005 and 6 era, that you would have refinanced 2 or 3 times by now.
Easy, yeah.
Dude, I think I've been in this house for 7 years, and I for sure have refinanced twice, maybe a third time in 7 years, not 17.
Well, and that's the thing. So when we're talking about kind of future casting, we're using some data to kind of tell us, hey, what's next year? What's the year after? What's things going to look like? Obviously, there's some levers that can be pulled that can change that forecast. But we actually think, kind of going back to your point about the feds maybe overcorrecting things,
Mhm.
we think that's been the historical method in which they kind of try to help fix the problem. They overcorrect it.
Yeah.
Well, when they do that, it actually causes a bigger problem somewhere. It causes recessions. It causes issues that will drive interest rates lower. And then you have your chance to go in and refinance. Now, at that point, your housing payment gets to go down. And we also are seeing forecasts for continued growth. This is an interesting one because I was looking not just nationally, but more so like in our backyard in Palmdale and Lancaster, Quartz Hill, that sort of thing. And it was saying right around like low fives to mid fives for appreciation is forecasted for 2022 and stacked year over year for the next 5 years. We were seeing certain areas 23 to 28% for the next 5 years, and that's compounded. But they actually came out, there was a couple of economists, I think it might have been Zillow, correct me if I'm wrong on that, but they were forecasting national appreciation at one point, and they came back and changed their tune. Do you want to kind of expand on what that number was? Because I thought that was super interesting.
Yeah. So, and it was a handful. It wasn't just one or two. It was like four of the primary five. Everybody at the end of the year was like, oh, in 2022, we'll see like 8 to 9% appreciation. And they were all pretty well in agreement with that. And then I just saw numbers earlier today where they changed their mind and they're looking like 18, 19% again. And that's after 20+% the last couple of years in a row. And prior to that, it was double digit, probably close to since the last 10 years, since 2012. And so for them to say, hey, yeah, we had all this growth, and like you said, it was compounding. And then these last 2 years, COVID, we, 20+%. And to say that we're going to do that again is just super interesting. I don't know what to make of it. And back to the market sets that we were talking about, like properties are selling still at the same rate, taking a little bit longer. And the pricing seems to be more on point. It's less of a runaway train because we're right at 100% list to sell. They're still selling. And if they anticipate, there's no reason why it wouldn't appreciate at a pretty darn good rate. So it's interesting. And I know like other markets out of our area are doing better than our home market. A lot of the places where our people are going to are just going insane. It's just, and so to nationally average it out, like we might not see that here, but now for all of them to be in agreement that, it's for sure double digits, almost 20% again, is very interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to bring up a point about, what was it going to be? I was going to tell you that I did this little forecast the other day for a client. It was basically buying in this market. I think we were looking at, I want to say it was like a 480 purchase price, which ironically happens to be around our median price point.
Yeah, 475 right? Is our average right now. Yeah.
Okay, so we were really close. We were using 480 as a reference. So we used 480. This particular buyer was doing 5% down, and so what I thought is I thought he was nervous about the market. Totally get it. I mean, I have a tremendous amount of empathy for somebody that doesn't own a home. They're just stepping their foot in for the first time into this real estate market. It's really challenging. But I wanted to add a little bit of comfort to that. And so using some of those forecasting tools, we're able to see where the mortgage insurance, because remember, he's doing 5 down, probably gonna have a mortgage insurance fee. We have the option to buy it out in one lump sum up front, but I'm like, don't do that. Use appreciation as a way of getting rid of that. Let me show you what I'm talking about. And let me show you, because the rates are higher than because you consider buying like a year and a half ago when rates were 2625 or 275. Didn't do it. He was nervous about the market. Now he's like, okay, I give up. Like, there's no place to rent. There's no place to live. I need a place. I'm going to own. This is what I'm going to do. How do I do this? Now we're looking at interest rates, somewhere in the low 4s for that particular scenario. Well, we worked it out. We have a little tool. We can use that forecasting and say, all right, you should be at the appreciation value that we need to get rid of mortgage insurance on this date or around this date. And with that, if our predictions are right and we see interest rates actually roll back down at some point, you're going to get the benefit of both. When you refinance, we're going to see a lower rate. We're going to ditch MI, and you're still in the same house that you didn't have to fight, and, and fight over and pay a higher price down the road too. So,
Yeah.
so we worked that out and we showed them what that would be and what that potential payment might be. And in our system, we can set what we call a strike price.
Mhm.
So we actually can plug in, so the borrower and us get an email that says, hey, Mike, the value of your house is X. The interest rate is what we had discussed is X. Let's refinance. And we can actually even set it to auto lock the loan in that particular scenario. Now, it makes some assumptions. We're assuming that the credit score is going to remain the same. We're assuming that they didn't
Yeah.
stack, a ton of different new debt on top of their credit profile and maybe mess up their DTI, but making some assumptions that life is kind of where we need it to be. And we're just predicting the value in the interest rate environment.
Yeah.
That particular homeowner at 480 was potentially looking at saving $600 to $700 per month, just a little bit down the road, right? For a little while, I think we're going to be inflated. We're going to actively manage that debt, and we're going to react when it hits that number.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a massive swing for their home ownership cost. It either drives it down or keep making the same payment and shift the $600 to $700 to principal. You just move it from the balance side, from the interest side to the principal. Now that house is paid off a lot faster, or
like 10 years faster.
Quite a bit, yeah. Or send that money to an investment advisor who can actually help you place it and get a yield on it. So there's just so many different opportunities you can do. Again, never see that on the rent side. I don't know any landlords that have ever been like, you know what, we're going to cut you a break, $600-700 a month in 2-3 years.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, we'll help you invest that money too. It just doesn't happen. So
yeah, and here's a bonus for being so nice.
Right.
Yeah. Crazy.
If you have that landlord, keep them, because that's make sure that they're super happy. Because that's
sure
a good landlord.
All right. Anything else that we want to cover for today?
Yeah, I think just, I like to kind of spin these things really in a positive manner and try to find the opportunities, because really every market has its opportunity.
Oh yeah.
And looking, in this place where it feels very scary, we feel like we're getting priced out, feeling like we're competing against a lot of offers to get our offer accepted. Feel like our back's against the wall because rates have kind of moved higher and the price point is now making our mortgage payment maybe a couple $100 more. We start to look at those things and realize it can actually get quite a bit worse. We're starting to kind of see where things potentially could be from a value standpoint. If you just simply take our median price, if we say, okay, we got, you said 475, right?
Yep.
And we add another 5,000, it's $23,750 that gets added to that 475. Now we're really close to 500K. Well, if we start to stack another 5 on it, another 5, you see how this goes. 475 seems really high. We're having this conversation 3-4 years from now, and we're talking about a median price at 580 or something like that. That's tough. Even with interest rates potentially back in the 2s, you're paying actually a bit more money. So if you can lock it in now and we can float down to those lower rates, you'll actually benefit on kind of both sides.
For sure. Someone looks like they're typing in a question real quick. So while they do that, I'll give an example. I'm meeting with someone next week that I met with in March of 19. I told them that their house was worth 375. And I just looked at the comps and it's probably gonna be like 5 to 525. So back to, you said, the $20,000 increase on price on the 5%, and my brain went to, that's probably gonna be like $100 a month on the payment alone, right? Mm-hmm. And, the 5% of that on your out-of-pocket costs and all that stuff. It was super interesting, but that's only at 5%. And we just saw, we just said it was 20, 20, 10, right? Those are big numbers. And so do the math real quick on the 475 times 20, that you're looking at like 575, $100,000.
Yeah, exactly. It starts to really stack. And I think if you're looking at it in the lens of maybe somebody who's just kind of getting started, it's like, who can afford this stuff? It just doesn't work for everybody. It has to come back down. But the same person saying that is totally missing the bigger picture, that there's plenty of families that can actually still write those checks relatively easier. I mean, really, income and wages have scaled up significantly. We were talking several years ago. Remember, minimum wage is $15, and people were like, "No way! I'm not paying somebody to work at a fast food joint for $15 an hour. It's not going to happen." Have
Yep.
you seen any of the posted job opportunity or hiring wages are pretty high right now. So
Hmm.
even some of the fast food joints are paying pretty darn good wages. It's an interesting time. Things have kind of definitely scaled up a bit.
Yeah.
Part of that is the amount of money that just sort of hit our system that got pushed into the entire system the monetary system that we live in.
Yep.
There's rumors it's somewhere about 40% of the money that we've actually been exposed to was printed in the last 24 months. It's a lot of money.
That's
That's why
insane.
we're seeing the things we are.
That's insane. All right. Well, he doesn't have the question in yet, so once that comes in, we can address it offline. But
It's a long question.
apparently, that's a long one.
That's a long answer too.
Yeah, exactly. All right, cool. Well, Ryan, thank you, sir. Good
Yeah, we'll
catching up
field
with you.
that if they whoever it is. I can't see that on my side, but if you have that question, drop it in the we'll field that.
Yeah, it's coming up in the comments, but it's not there, so we can address it offline.
Sounds good.
We'll go from there. Have a good
All
weekend.
right. Sounds good. Thanks, guys.
See ya.